to the developers, or I should say, I shouldn't just say developers, but anyone that has an active role in the development cycle, pace yourself. Take care of yourself first. We can get more projects, we can get more money, we can get more clients. We can't. You're a human being, and you have to come first. If it's ever getting to a point where you feel like it's impacting your personal life, if you're laying in bed every Sunday dreading going to work and all that, and that's a chronic issue that you've tried to talk to your management team about, know when to seek greener pastures.
This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 251, From Dev to CTO. Welcome to Talking Drupal. In today's show, we have the pleasure of talking with Dr. Shallon Brown about her journey from Drupal developer to CTO. We also get her insight on current events, being a successful developer, and industry trends. Good afternoon, everyone. Joining us today, we have Dr. Shallon Brown. 20 years of experience in software engineering. She currently serves as the CTO of North Studios, a web development and support firm based in British Columbia. That's Canada, for all of you keeping track. She completed her doctorate in information systems engineering, where she delivered a dissertation entitled Motivations in Open Source, a quantitative study on Drupal in academia. We are definitely going to dig into that. She has also worked on hundreds of Drupal projects over the past 2 decades, including work for the IRS, Johns Hopkins University, and Columbia University. She's done several keynote speeches related to the open source industry at conferences around the country. Question is, which country? The United States or Canada or both? We'll talk about that in this episode of Talking Drupal. Dr. Brown, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Oh, this is going to be a great one. Before we jump into our primary topic, let's introduce our hosts. Stephen Cross, welcome to the show. How have you
John?
been?
Good. How is everybody doing? Man, we've been cramming these show recordings in the last few weeks. Huh? It seems like we've seen each other every other day the last few weeks, although it hasn't been that much. So what could be new with me? Well, there's another interesting project I've been working on that I'll give you a little sneak peek about. I've been trying to, as you know, I've switched to Linux. I care about privacy.
Wait, what?
What's that?
What?
You switched to Linux?
Yeah, I never talk about that. I squeeze that into every conversation I can, and I'm hoping
pretty sure
someone
listeners
asks
are
me
going to
why.
start. I'm pretty sure listeners are going to start sending tweets like, come on, John, that joke is old. Get new material.
So I've been exploring having better privacy and security on a phone. So I currently use an iPhone. I feel like that's, of the two solutions out there, I feel like that's the best secured option. But I have tried out something called Graphene OS. It's an Android operating system that you can put on a very limited number of phones, but it's focused on privacy and security. And I've been using it for about 2 weeks, installed it about 2.5 weeks ago. Actually have been using it as my primary phone for the past 7 days. And it's real interesting. But what it is Android that you buy from when you go to T-Mobile or any other place and you get an Android phone. What you're really getting is you're getting the Android Open Software Project, which is an open source project. But then you got Google sticking all its stuff into it. So you get all these Google services and all these things attached to that open source project. So you have a phone that's tracking you, and it's really not private, and there's no privacy at all. But you can actually take that open source project like Graphene did and improve it for security and keep out all the Google stuff. And that's really what this project is. I've installed it. It's basically the current version of Android. If you're familiar with vanilla Android, you get a beautiful Android operating system, works exactly the same way. The only difference is you have limited apps. So you don't get the Play Store, which is where all the bad stuff comes from. But you do get access to some software stores that you can download some open source products that will be email clients and Twitter clients and things like that. And there is another store called an Aurora store that does give you access to apps that are in the Play Store. So it's really an interesting project. I'll probably writing something up about it in the future as I play with this a little bit more, but it's been a lot of fun.
So did you have to jailbreak the phone to install it? Or
so that's what's interesting about this project is you don't have to jailbreak the phone. It runs on, it's currently running on the Google Pixel phones, and those are really set up to be open and easy to install them without damaging them and without jailbreaking them.
Okay.
So it is very similar
cool.
it's very similar to installing, if you've ever installed any other ROMs for phones, it's the same sort of process, but you are absolutely not jailbreaking. Yeah. So I could install it back with what it had before without any trouble.
Just to be clear, you can still get Angry Birds on it, right?
I don't know. I don't have Angry Birds.
Oh, come on.
So I think I'm at a bit of an advantage because I don't do Facebook and I don't do those things. And I wouldn't do them on a phone anyway if I had them. So I don't need those kinds of things. So I think that's a big help in what I'm doing. So your basic services are pretty much available. I've downloaded only a few things from the Play Store that I've played with, but I think I could pretty much go with open source solutions there. So it's pretty interesting. But this phone runs super fast, and the battery power is great because it's not all this crap isn't running in the background.
So did you just have to like put the SIM card in and it worked once you installed it, or did you have to activate it somehow?
No, I just took after I installed it. I installed the phone, the operating system on the phone on Wi-Fi, and everything ran. I took my SIM card out of my iPhone, put it into this phone, and didn't even reboot it. It was just running.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was great.
I'm gonna have to check that out.
Yeah, check it out. I'll put some links in the show notes to some great videos on YouTube that kind of tell you what the system is and actually how to install it too if you need some steps to do it. But you'll need a Google Pixel phone. That's the key.
Fabulous. Nick, what's going on with you?
So as Stephen mentioned, we've been recording these shows pretty quickly. If you've listened to episode 250, we had to re-record one, which is, our listeners will know is very rare, but
Spoiler
that means we've had, well, this show will come out after 250. So that means we've recorded 3 shows in 5 or 6 days, which is definitely out of the ordinary. So the only kind of cool project that I've done in the last few days is over the weekend, my wife and I put together a macrame for a strawberry pot. So I don't know if you know what macrame is, but it's those like little rope, like pot hangers that people make. And cool. So my wife's been hanging every single pot in our house with those. So we made one for outdoors. I'll post some pictures in the next newsletter, but we had to get creative with it because, strawberry pots have those little, extra pockets of dirt on the sides that stick out so you can plant more than one. So it was a little bit more unique than the typical macrame. So it was a fun little project.
Get us
Took
some
a couple
pictures.
hours.
I mean, pretty soon we're gonna have like At Home with Nick series when he's planting his new vines in his yard and doing his macrame.
Yeah, every project recently has been kind of gardening oriented, but I mean, it's keeping us sane, so it's a good thing. And how about you, John? What's new with you in the last few days?
For those of you watching the video, you'll notice that I've got a haircut. I got fed up with my hair last night and decided to chop it all off. So I have no more hair, or I have less hair than I did maybe on 250. But I wanted to take a second and do a little bit of a shout out. So at Oomph, we have this idea of a plus one, and a plus one goes out to people that go kind of above and beyond in their kind of day to day, and just give it the extra effort to to really go above and beyond. So I wanted to give a shout out and a plus one to Stephen, because he has been doing some great work with the podcast, and getting really interesting people to come on, including today's guest. And last week we had Moshe, not once but twice. funny. And he's really been doing a great job pushing Talking Drupal forward. So, I think as Moshe said yet last week, again, spoiler, we hit a milestone with episode 250, but that is large in part to Stephen, who, if you're watching the video, just sat back down at his desk. So I wanted to give him a shout out.
I didn't hear the shout out, but thanks anyway. I'll listen to it on the replay.
Cool.
So my cats aren't getting along. My daughter's cat is here while she's been here for Corona. And one cat was just in the litter box, and the other cat sat right out inside the litter box, the two that don't get along. And they were hissing, and I was trying to hide it. I don't know if it came on the audio.
No, we had no idea. Which
Okay.
It's funny because you just said that two cats were doing that, and in my head I was like, how would that equate to people? Like that's like going to like a restaurant and having only one bathroom and having like a line of people outside.
Yeah.
Anyway, Shallon, do you have anything that you would like to add? Anything that's new with you? I know we were all over the place, so you feel free to just drop anything in there.
Not too. I'm enjoying the nice weather that's been out, and just kind of exercising more and enjoying kind of stretching my legs. Otherwise, I love to fish, and so I went fishing this weekend. I didn't really catch anything, but I also wasn't paying all that much attention. I'm one of the put the pole in the line and then read your Kindle type things. It's more of an excuse to get away and kind of decompress a bit, but that's my fun thing. The first time of the season in my area that I've done that. So
isn't that true for most fishermen though? They're more there for the quiet than they are for the actual catching of the fish.
Sometimes I've gotten so into fishing now that I started doing it as a hobby a couple of years ago that there's all different breeds of fishermen. Some of them are doing it, like you said, just because they want to get away. And obviously that's a part of it. Some people are generally doing it for sustenance. There's a lot of people that unfortunately can't afford, especially in a pandemic, robust protein sources, particularly with the cost of food going up. So for quite a swath of the population, you will find a lot of people there that's their primary protein source. And for them, it is more serious. But yeah, the outdoors nature of it and all of that is the talk. It's the communal aspect of it. And I hear tell there's good fish in these parts. And, oh, well, which pond is the best one? And, oh, well, I use guppies. And, oh, I use, figuring out who uses what. And they all have their little sage wisdoms or I guess what you call like good luck charms and all these kinds of things, and I find that to be the most interesting part of it.
Okay, I got a couple of questions.
Okay.
One, catch and keep or catch and release. What are you doing?
I prefer to catch and keep. I like to do the local lake fishing. You guys probably know I'm in Reston, Virginia / the DC metro area, and so I like to go over to the Chesapeake and fish the best. However, there are some stocked lakes and ponds around as well. If you want to get the big fish reliably, then it's the catch and release, because those are the ones that are just getting bigger and they're just stocked better. But if you're going for to actually want to eat stuff, then you're going to want to go to keep it. So
okay, so that's a perfect follow up. Mm-hmm. What's your favorite fish to catch and eat?
Oh gosh. I really like craypie, which is an Eastern Shore type of a thing. Croaker is also really good as well. I like catfish, but it's a lot of prep work to actually be good with cooking the catfish ahead of time. There's a lot of work you have to do to get rid of the gunkiness of the catfish, but that's probably my favorite. And they're big, like wheeling in a big 5, 6, 7 pound catfish. There's no better feeling in the world of like that feeling of just tugging it and oh my God, I feel like the line's going to snap maybe. And that excitement of it is a big part of the game. So
I have so many more questions, but I think we could probably push this to another show.
Yeah, no problem.
Man. Okay. One more. I got one more. I got to ask. Catfish. You catch catfish with a pole? I thought that was like, what isn't catfish the one where you see guys on Facebook like just like sticking their hands in the water and like on the shoreline and like pulling out a giant catfish?
You can do it that way as well, but it's one of those things where if you put something in the water, any bottom feeder, any mid-level fish is going to be attracted. You can't always control it, so to speak. So it's more about getting the right type of the right type of pole, as well as the right type of line that's going to be able to hold the test. Just like sword fishing or anything else, when you're talking about bigger size fish, if you guys ever watch those shows on Discovery Channel, whatever it is, where, they're bringing in these huge fish, and it's just having the right gear to do it. You can still do it with a pole and everything, but they are looking for like one type of fish specifically. So of course they're targeting their catch practices around that. I'm looking for pretty much anything that's in the water. So I may happen to get a catfish, and then it's like, okay, great, I've got the equipment to do it, but that might not be all I catch, for the day.
Got it. Yeah, Wicked Big Tuna is filmed up our way off of Massachusetts. So every so often I watch that for the accents, of course. All right.
I've had a catfish snap my line before, though, too. I mean, my pole, like not just the line, but the whole pole, like.
Oh my God,
that's really frustrating.
Yeah, it's fun.
Huh. Okay.
Like, wow.
I have so many more questions, but let's move on to our primary topic, because that's really the point of the show, and it's going to be a great talk today. So first and foremost, how did you get involved with technology and programming? Everybody has kind of like that Genesis story, that aha moment where they're like, oh my gosh, I want to do this for like the rest of my life. What's yours?
Well, my dad was a computer systems analyst at Dulles Airport, and was an engineer for my whole life. He's retired now. He mostly did mainframe computing, because when he was, coming up, that was the deal. So being the big daddy's girl that I am and have been, I wanted to do pretty much anything he was doing, hence the fishing as well. He had a fishing boat growing up, and so I just, got really into it. But as a result of that, I tell people, just like if you're, a mechanic's kid, you're going to grow up with all types of parts of cars all over the house and in the garage, and it's going to be inescapable. And so for us, we had different pieces of DOS machines and terminal style machines from when I was little. I mean, when I was still in single digit numbers of age. And so it was always there. We always had AOL, we had the internet long before anybody else. We had AOL long before anybody else. Like, we had, video game systems and all of that around, because you like that. And so it just kind of, was a big piece of it. And coupled with the fact that I was just always more of a math brain person. And I just excelled well at the sciences and mathematics in primary through, K through 12 school. So for me, it was a natural progression. In high school, we did have couple of basic computers and coding classes. And of course, at that time, this was just HTML was the only option, obviously, at that point. But all those things then built. And then when I got to undergrad, I started off at the computer science program as far as the bachelor's. And I just found a real aptitude for it, and felt like, I love the concept of a complex solution to a complex problem. It was something that always kept me going. And I'm that person that once I get focused on something that I'm really interested in, as far as coding and all that, I can't put it down. Like I have to get it done, and I have to try to make it so that, I can't stop thinking about it until I solve it. So for me, it just felt like, I tell people it's kind of like I love dogs. I'm a big dog lover. And so if you ever watch dogs that are bred for a specific purpose, like sheep dogs or any of that, and you take them out into a range, at first they're really confused. They feel like there's something there that's driving them to want to do something like chase, but they're not entirely sure what it is. And then after just a little coaching, they're like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is what I'm built to do. I'm built to chase the sheep. I'm built to do this. And this is and it just clicks for you. Like you just feel like, that's it. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. And so for me, I think college around about that time, undergrad was definitely, I was like, yeah, this is the right path. This is what I want to do.
Sorry, I got two quick follow-ups. First computer and first programming language. What were they? My
first computer that I actually owned was a Dell Windows machine. What version, I can't remember off the top of my head at the time, but this would have been back about 2001 as far as undergrad goes. And you asked me something else. I'm sorry. First
programming language.
Oh, C, just regular C classic, not C++, but just regular old C was my first programming. Well, HTML isn't really a language. It's a script if you want to get that technical, or a markup, but you could count HTML as the first one if you wanted to. Yeah. But C would be my first real deal coding language.
Very cool. I think the first computer I remember was a Commodore 64 that had a 128-bit switch. So you could start the computer in 128-bit mode, but that computer,
cutting edge.
It had 5 1/4 floppy disks, and you had to like manually load the programs. I remember it being loud and hot and slow.
I go back to Compaq before they were owned by HP, and zip drives for all of you listeners out there. Look that one up. Good time.
I had a zip drive for one class in college. You had to save your work on a zip drive. Such a waste of money. I think I still have the disk somewhere. It's like 100 megabytes, I don't even know anybody that's ever owned a zip drive outside of college.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, how did you end up with Drupal? When did you first hear about it? When did you start kind of using it?
Yeah, so I was working at Hopkins at the time. I worked for Johns Hopkins University / medical for about 8.5 years in my earlier part of my career. And at the time, this was around the mid 2000s or late 2000s at that point. And that's when the really big push for open source, in my experience, was really kicking up and getting off to the races. And the Great Recession definitely ushered a lot of that in. Long story short, at the time, at the division I was working for, they had all these Oracle systems. And as you guys probably know, at that time when we were in it, that was really what we all got kind of pushed to do is, okay, you mastered some of these coding languages, C, C++, Java was the bigger thing. And then you probably want to specialize in a proprietary stack of some type, whether it's Microsoft or Oracle, IBM, pick one, and we'll make you rich. That was pretty much, get certified in it and you will do fine. But right around when the Great Recession hit, particularly for nonprofits like Johns Hopkins, hey, if we can kill off this $1.3 million a year Oracle contract with all the servers and all of this stuff, we'd save a lot of money, coupled with the fact that this was Oracle Portal 9i at the time, and they were like, it's one of those weird things where changing something in one place doesn't necessarily change it in the other. It was very old school. It was hard to manipulate, and they figured out, hey, well, we've got engineers here already. Why don't we just train them in PHP, get them up and running? We'll pay them the work, but then we don't have to pay any licensing fees. And that was kind of the edict. And so that's where it started. They wanted to revise their intranet or to really build a new intranet that was going to replace this portal system. And that was back in 2007, roughly. It was Drupal Core 5 at the time. I think 6 was just on its way out, but 5 was where it was at. So that's how I got into it. And then it just builds from there. That was back in the days too, at least the next 2 or 3 years after that was the times when Drupal was really off in its heyday. We didn't have all the competition from WordPress and all these other things quite yet into the equation. So it was just a natural progression as far as, if you were a coder and you had 1 or 2 years of Drupal experience, you could get a job pretty much anywhere. And it was so overwhelming as far as the opportunities. And so that is how I originally got into it.
And these are all Drupal 6 probably sites at that point, right?
5 going into 6, correct.
5 going into 6, yeah. So what kind of Drupal work, what kind of Drupal developer were you? Were you on the more project management site builder side or into the code, writing custom code? What kind of things were you doing?
I was coder. I was regular old developer. When we first started it, like the intranet I was talking about, that was more content entry and those types of things at the time. My next Drupal project, however, would be, which is a much bigger, more involved project for grant-funded research. That was me, and that was coding. That was, from the ground up and modifying out the web forms module. I remember doing that. And trying to make it like a step-by-step process, which at the time wasn't a thing that it did inherently. And, it was just a lot of in the weeds custom module development. That was Drupal 6. That was definitely a Drupal 6 project. And that was an elongated one. So, but I was traditionally more back end. And even now I'm getting more into front end. I can do plenty of front end coding. It's simply doing it eloquently and doing it, now that we have, as you guys know, the evolution of front end now is so much more all-encompassing as far as, you can pull devs from not just the content management system you're using, doing this with an MVC type framework and all those types of things has expanded the definition of front end. And so, of course, it's now also compiled CSS or SAS and less and all those things in the equation. Learning to do that in a way that is not going to be sloppy is something that I am still perfecting myself. But traditionally, mostly back end. A lot of the integrations was a big part of my job. As I evolved in my career, of course, you get more and more into the more IT management side of this and tech leadership, which is more of, I make the blueprint for the house, I dice out to the engineers what part of the house they're building. I will take a piece as well, but you also have more of that high level bird's eye view of what's going on.
So as a CTO now, how much do you have your hands into coding?
More of my work now is going behind other people to make sure they're doing it right,
Okay.
less about me actually doing it from scratch. That does happen, but more of my role is more on the like server infrastructure control, making sure we've got pipelines up and running. And, those are the bigger issues. It's less in the weeds on any one project because you can't be at this level. You just can't, even if you want to, with 50, 60, 70, 80 projects literally going all at the same time, all of them with active development. To take away and say this one here is my baby. It does happen, depending on the skill set. If we don't have another engineer that is, on that same variant, then it has to be me. But we try to get away from that. I think I tell people to look at it more like you want to put the right tools in with the right jobs. And when you're talking about upper level management at that level, it's not the right application for you. There are things that your organization needs from you far more than coding. It's sage wisdom. It's talking to clients intelligently about sales and things. It's helping with connecting the dots internally as to, okay, who's doing the RFP handoffs and all of these other business machinations that go along with it that your company needs from you versus the coding, which they can get from other places. There's certain things that, you can really do in certain roles.
So do you find you're doing mentoring of senior developers, or is it really just kind of setting a structure and putting stuff in place so that people can be successful?
It is the latter, but it's both. I think that it depends on who you are. I have always been a big fan of mentorship. My specialization under my doctorate title is adult IT education. And so I love to mentor. I think that we as an industry have gotten away from that a lot. And that's a part of what's leading to such high turnover, is that we're not investing in our engineers like we did or in our workers in general like we once did. And so I am very big on, I want to try to make you a good, solid engineer, or a better engineer than when you first came here. And that isn't just coding. There's so much more, as you guys know, to the equation than just that. It's all the sage wisdom around the open source world and the Drupal world specifically. So I try to do both. I don't get as much time for mentorship as I would like to. So then my job is to tell my tech leads that are under me as well, that are also leading a lot of these projects, how I expect them to facilitate that and making sure that they're carrying that out as well.
Just in talking to you for this short time, it's clear that you've overcome some challenges throughout your career. You've shattered some ceilings. Let's talk about that a little bit. What challenges did you or do you still experience as a Black woman working in a white male dominated field?
That's a really good question. I actually did a lot of thinking about that last night when I was reading over, the questions for this podcast. And I think the biggest thing is that I definitely, and it's hard to know, none of us will ever know, but I think that the female aspect of it was far more impacting than necessarily the race issue, because we in IT work in a fairly diverse field, relatively speaking, to others. Now, obviously, we still have room to grow. We're not at the numbers that we should be, and that needs to be stated. But relative to other fields and other kind of careers, we have a pretty diverse group. As you guys know, part of that is because nearly 50% of our workforce is coming over on visas because we don't make enough engineers. And so you're getting people in that aren't necessarily as in tune with the racial history of the country. They're not on that wire. So they're not coming at you. For a lot of where they come from, the concept of race is fairly foreign because everybody there is of the same race in a lot of cases. So it was less of that. But the gender or /sex issue is something I deal with still every day in a male dominated world that we live in and that we work in. And I think that part of it is that the boys club mentality is real. I don't know if society really helps men in a younger ages learn or be as versed on social skills and social interactions in that way as a society as a whole. I definitely think that's a part of it. We tend to gravitate to what we're comfortable for too. As human beings, we go the path of least resistance. And so I think that there's that. For me, even as a leader, I notice it more. I think that the amount of times I get kickback from male coworkers, even ones that I'm technically their boss, But they don't, it's sort of that entitlement that they're right, or the entitlement that their way is the right way, and putting up the argument about it and all that. Also with some clients, there's plenty of clients that are stuck in that mentality. I think that's something that we should state, is that you're sometimes dealing with people that aren't, of that mentality either. And they're going to treat you like, I've had clients that have talked to myself, and at North Studio, for example, our senior project manager, her name is Candace Bates. Her and I ride side saddle often together throughout the day. I'm the technical input. She's, of course, the project manager, and we kind of, we're close. And there's been times where we've had clients that have called up and gone over our head to talk to the owner of the company that's male, because they specifically don't want to, and they'll refer to us as the girls or things like this that are just very subtle, but you already know that where their comfort level is. That happens all the time. So for me, that's what I noticed the most. That isn't to say race wasn't an issue, in certain places, especially. It was pretty much my entire career. It's usually just me, the only African American that is in the building, let alone, or maybe I get lucky enough to have one other. But there was a company I worked for that was in the heart of DC several years back that, they had 150 people working at the company. As you guys may or may not know, DC's Black population is 47%. Okay. It's, and by those numbers, they should have had, roughly 50 to 60 Black people working in it. They had 2. It was just me and one other person. Wow. For me, it feels like my frustration with it is more of, why isn't this an alarm fire for them? Obviously it is for me, but I'm used to it. I shouldn't be used to it, but I am used to it. Why is this just par for the course? Why are we okay with this? What are you doing to help with demographic outreach? Are you going to HBCUs to find that Black talent? Because it's there. We know it's there. It exists. What are we doing to kind of get into that niche and not just have it be business as usual? So that's what I've definitely noticed.
It seems to me a company like that would be really limiting itself in the kind of excellent people they could have, right?
You would think, and some of that is just, some of it is more moving towards more outsourced models, keeps them away from the lower entity of it. But even this was for workers that went into office. Yes, we had a lot of developers that were, all over the place, but in the direct office itself, I was the only Black person. We had another Black person that worked remotely as an engineer, but of the 80 or 90 people that were physically in the office, I was always the only one. And it did. You walk outside and you walk across the street to the local restaurant for happy hour, and it's not just Black, but it's all, it's Hispanic, it's lots of Asians, lots of Indian Americans, all types of people. And the contrast was so stark. So
one of the things that I'm always curious about is one of the things that you mentioned specifically that kind of stuck out to me is that sometimes your clients will go over your head, and at your position, that's hard to do because there's only one person, possibly, I don't know if it's a board of directors, but possibly one person over your head. How do you confront that? How do you process that and determine what the appropriate response is there, and challenge that kind of inherent issue?
Well, for me, it's, and if they want to talk to the owner, you're right, it is just one person at this particular company. But sometimes they won't go his route, they'll go the sales guy's route. We have 2 sales guys, and that helps sell them the thing. And even though the sales guy isn't my boss, technically I would be his, that still, they want that male dialogue, and it is more of them venting through that. The way that I confront it is I really don't. I look more at the nuance of what they're saying, and say, okay, if these are your frustration points, let's talk about how we can mitigate that. Because confronting a client head on is never going to work out well. Yeah. If you get into it, I can't change them. A lot of these guys, they're 50, 60 some years old. They're a cooked egg, as my mom used to say. You're not going to uncook them. I'm not going to be able to change the world in that way. You know what I'm saying? For everybody. So I can't try, and I shouldn't wrap myself around trying, because that's energy. Frustration is energy I could be directing to something positive all the time for any situation in life. But internally, it more gives you an insight into how they're thinking. Once you understand how somebody else is thinking, it can really help you adjust your approach to both the situation and to them. So I take it more as understanding where they're coming from, and therefore how best to manage them as a client.
Do you find that problem goes away over time with those particular clients as they get to know you and get to work with you more frequently? Or
yes and no.
Okay.
They're fine. They're always fine with it until they hit a point of conflict, whether it's, hey, timelines aren't fast enough, or why are we spending so much time babbling on these calls? And I don't feel like things are, it's sort of, or how much money am I paying? I don't want to pay that much. And when you say no, that becomes okay, I'm just going to jump over their head versus trying to talk it out. I think that's definitely something that I notice. But we were just talking about this internally. There are some really bold, it's not even just on the phone. There are things where, not my company, thankfully, but at a company that we know that we also work with from time to time. As far as you guys know, the Drupal space is small. We all talk, we all know each other. And there was a time when coworkers of mine were at that company at that time. This was 6-7 years ago. And, long story short, the owner / head of that company is female. And so she went out with the male sales guy at the time to go on site. And when they got there, the stakeholder in it, his wife was there. And he said to the owner of the company, hey, would you like to go shopping with my wife while me and the sales guy talk business? Like, that was something that actually happened. And so, as you can imagine, when you're a female head of a company, you're strong. You're naturally have a strong personality. And so, said leader of said company, I hear, was livid. She was very not happy about it. And so that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. You see that boys club stuff all the time. And no, there is no escaping it. I can't. And I think it's the same for them. The only thing you could do is walk away. But that's not easy either, right? You've got people's livelihoods. This isn't just about me. It's about the 30, 40, 50, 60 other people whose livelihoods are in tow with that. So it depends on how egregious it is. So
looking at the tech industry as a whole, how do you think I think it's fair to say that you're a technologist above all. How do you think the current world stage is going to affect the tech industry?
I think that number one, everybody finally, some of the real, holdouts finally figured out through the pandemic that you can have a company work from home and work remotely for most cases. If you're in our field, us all queuing up to get with all this commuting and all the gridlock, particularly here for me in the DC metro area. You guys probably know this is no joke, just like New York City and the others. Commuting is a serious time suck and a serious stressor. And it's a lot of money to keep a physical building up and running as far as the leasing and the lights on and all that comes with that, the janitorial services. And I think it gave people finally a chance to ask that question, why are we really doing this? I've now seen from my own eyes that my company can function and things can get done when we're all working from home without a huge slide off in productivity. And I think that that's going to be something that's going to continue for a lot of holdout businesses that otherwise really couldn't or entertain it prior. There's exceptions to that rule. There are certain things that have to be done on site. We'll never get away from that. But by and large, I definitely think that that's going to be the biggest shift that is not, people aren't going to reconcile. When people get used to saving money, unless there's a really good reason, they're not going to switch back to just coughing up money.
So was your studio largely work from home before the pandemic hit, or mix, or was everybody in an office?
We have been completely remote for about 5 or so years now. We did have a physical office for, North Studio's been around a long time. I should preface that for the people listening, is that North Studio is one of the oldest open source shops in North America, if not the world at this point. It's been around 22, going on 23 years. That's a long time for our field, relatively speaking. And so that said, we did have a physical office over the first 15 or so years, and then we converted to completely remote about 5 years ago. So we were already there for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, that one of the more interesting kind of lasting impacts on the work side is how many people are going to stay work from home. I mean, I know some companies, they're pushing to get their people back, and I think part of it is so that they don't get used to working from home, whereas other companies are taking the approach you mentioned, where they're realizing, their employees are more productive when they don't lose 2 hours a day to a commute, and they're more rested. And, people like, I haven't put gas in, I didn't commute before really, but my wife and I have filled our cars once in 3 months, and so people are starting to really realize the benefits of working from home. And I think it's almost more important for the workers to realize that, and the employees to realize that, than even just the employers. Seeing how much losing a commute gives value is enormous.
So,
yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say the stress factor on it as well. It isn't for me just the time. I recognize when I switched to working remotely that that stress eats up on you and you don't even realize it over time. You know what I mean? As far as, okay, yes, most of the time commuting goes okay, but what about when the train breaks down or your car has a flat tire, and all of the costs associated with all of those things and knocking all of that schedule around, that's all adds up on you on top of your job stress and the scheduling issues, as far as for those of you that have families and children and all of that too. It just compounds all of that when, if you had that extra hour or two a day of your time to either invest in your job or invest in your home life, that work-life balance is so much easier. That in my experience, people want to work harder for you when you relieve that stress from them. Like naturally, if you love what you do, if you genuinely have a passion for what you do, you want to see your company thrive, you're a genuinely good worker that cares, you'll work more out of just because you're so, you feel grateful, that sense of gratefulness. Without all of the pressure of, oh gosh, I have to work all these extra hours on top of all this commuting. You know what I mean? So
I'm gonna go off script for a second because I have a question. You are, in my opinion, the right person to ask this. Right, you're a CTO of a tech company. I'm imagining you hire employees, you deal with reviews, you do all that stuff. Recently, I was listening to something, and it was saying that Twitter and Facebook are allowing their employees to, work from home all the time now. It's like company policy. However, they were saying that Facebook was actually thinking, because now people don't necessarily have to live in the Bay Area or they have to live in Silicon Valley, that Facebook was actually going to reduce those people's salaries because they were able to move to kind of more rural areas. Just out of curiosity, how do you feel about that? You were talking about the whole cost savings of not having to commute and whatnot, and I wonder what your thoughts are there.
I think it's about time. For their business model, especially. I definitely think that some of that is PR. Like I think that that's important to understand, is that there is certainly an element here that's going on that has absolutely nothing to do with worker happiness or all of that. It is the press of, look at us, look at how we're adapting. Like, you know what I mean? And I think that there's an element there that's kind of capitalizing on the pandemic as far as how it looks on the outside. The better question is, how are they structuring their company to support remote work? Are they really, aligning their workers and providing the infrastructure to do that? Do employees get their own company laptop that they can borrow or whatever for as long as they're at the company? Does that laptop come with things like Slack and Teamwork or whatever online systems you use, Microsoft Teams, all that stuff? Are they really set up to handle that? Or in every department, fairly consistently? Or is this just, we can't? I think that, I see it both ways. Yes, it's a great thing. Don't get me overall. I think for the workers, it's a good thing. But I also think that, from their perspective, this is a lot more about liability than it is anything else. Let's not kid ourselves. Nobody wants that big lawsuit. Oh, I went to the office, I got sick with COVID. It completely wiped me out for a month. I had to be on a ventilator, all these things. And that could be a huge lawsuit that nobody wants to deal with, multiple lawsuits. And so that to me is the bigger, if you read between the lines, what's really going on. Yeah.
And if they really want to support that kind of thing, then it has to be optional and come with some sort of moving package, I mean, and the truth is that wouldn't be the worst thing either. I mean, that would drive pressure on bringing down rent in Silicon Valley. I mean, my house in Silicon Valley would be $5 million. It's crazy. So if people are able to kind of have work-life balance and people want security. One of the reasons why Silicon Valley is so desirable is because there's so much opportunity there. And if companies there provide, the climate's nice too, and there's a lot of other positives, obviously. But if people have that opportunity, people will spread out. And that can only, I think that can only be positive.
I guess the root question there is how do you feel about Facebook potentially reducing somebody's salary because they don't live in Silicon Valley anymore?
Well, first of all, as you guys know, you can't legally reduce somebody's salary necessarily unless they sign off on it. I think that's going to backfire big time. There's still supply and demand at the end of the day. As you guys know, in our world, again, for every job for every engineer looking, there's more than one job available pretty much universally. So that means we have a lot more power and control inherently. So they may say that, and all that means is, okay, well, then you're going to get the junior devs out of college that are less sage with them and all that comes with that. Now, maybe that's a good thing for their business model, and bless them for that and all that comes with that. But for mid to senior level engineers, there are plenty of other gigs, fish in the sea for them. They will not go hungry. You know what I mean? So if that's the route that they went, it would backfire big time. You cannot, as you build a company up, especially, as you guys know, there has to be rungs. You can't just have all lower level dev workers and then you have C-level executives. There has to be middle management to keep it all functioning. And that's where your senior devs, your tech leads come in. And so if you're saying to them, you know what, based on where you live, this is how much you're paying them, I'd say, well, that's not fair, because there's shops that run devs that are all over the world that are getting paid, whatever it is for their country, not necessarily what it is for their specific living space. And so those things really vary. For example, if I was in New York City and I physically went to an office, I'd still be obviously wanting to get an extra amount of money to facilitate that, because I'm in such an expensive place on the world. But once an employee's already hired, you can't have that conversation anymore, because it's not, as a company, it's not the function of your business. It's really, I need to pay this person a competitive rate based on what the market value allows, period. That should be the end of it. And if the market value is dropping in your area for the entire state or for the whole country, that's one thing. Then you say, okay, well, you can't get raises this year. None of us can, because of course the company isn't doing so well. That's reasonable. It is not reasonable to get into anybody's individual life circumstances like that from a demographic, legal perspective as well, because there could be other things. Yeah, I'm moving out to this rural part of the country or of my state, but I got all these other things, going on in the equation as far as my personal life and all that comes with that are more expensive. I'm a doctorate of computer science. Uncle Sam has made it abundantly clear to me that he wants his money back for those student loans. And so regardless of where I live, that will always be over my head. And I'm bringing the skills to the table for you, right? So you have to pay for that. That's a part of the expense that comes with me as a worker. So it's complex. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So we're going to switch gears here a minute. I saw a presentation that you did recently at a conference. It was posted online, and it was advice for developers, how to build your career, some tips. I was wondering if you could give us a few of those tips that you would give to young developers moving up in their career. What are some of the things they should focus on? If you could take that 1 hour awesome presentation that will be in the show notes and condense it into a few bullets.
Sure. First and foremost, understand what our industry is, not what we would hope it to be. I think we have to really look at it for what we currently have going on. I tell people this is not our parents' workforce as far as job prospects go. Understanding that, as I said at that conference, that the average tenure for an engineer at the top 5, which is Google, Yahoo, all those big boy tech companies, the average tenure is now only 13 months. That's it.
Oh, wow. 13
months. That's it. That's the average. We have the highest turnover of any field anymore, higher than retail, higher than food, higher than service work, any field. Since about 2016, that's been the case. And I think a lot of people don't get that math and what that means to them. That means that, and that's the average. That means 50% of people ain't making it that far. Okay. We've got people falling off way before 1 year's time. In knowing that, you have got to financially prepare yourself for layoffs from the jump off. You're not going to have the luxury, because it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if you were the best worker and all those things. If whatever your client is got fed up for reasons possibly quite out of your control, and says, okay, we're about to shut all of this down, and that's it, you're all laid off. I've had it where me and 10 other engineers all got laid off 2 days before Christmas because the client said, okay, you know what, that's it. And that happens. And so you've got to have 2 to 3 months of financial cushion. I know they tell everybody to do that, but in our field, it's even more mission critical. I think if one thing that the pandemic taught a lot of us, or at least universally, regardless of what field it is that you can't depend on getting through to unemployment and some of these other social safety nets. You just can't. Hopefully that is the case, but might not be the case, maybe 50-50. So in knowing that, then you have to prepare yourself for that reality of turnover and what that's going to feel like, and kind of how to get through it succinctly. So that's number one. Number two, you've got to be prepared to always be learning and challenging yourself to kind of keep on going. Like, even since I've been in the field, as I kind of alluded to, back when I was doing it, there was no Drupal, there was no WordPress, there was no full stack as we think of it. Like, these weren't concepts that existed 20 years ago or even 15 years ago for the most part. When I learned Java, it was no framework to this. I mean, you learn object-oriented programming, but all of the heavy lifting of that was up to you, the coder. Now we have frameworks and structure and all of that. But you're going to have jobs that expect you to even know that going in the gate, that aren't as open to training. And I think that's a part of it, is that a lot of this will have to be on your free time, more than most jobs otherwise would be. So there's that. And retraining, don't be afraid to facilitate that both in traditional ways and non-traditional ways. Right now I'm going through Block Academy to get my React certifications, because I know I need to learn it. I know the concepts, obviously, and you've done as many coding languages as I have over the years. You pick things up quickly, but learning how to do that in the way that it's designed to be built is something I need to master. And there's no substitute for getting your hands dirty and doing it. It's like I said at the speech I gave, I gave Gordon Ramsay as the example of that people get caught up in all the personality of it. But behind all that was a man who, by his early 30s, had a 5-star Michelin chef rating. There are a handful of people on this planet ever that have managed to accomplish that in their lifetime, let alone that young. And so you can't be a 5-star New York City restaurateur without knowing how to cook. You can't be that type of chef. You can't be a great open source engineer and not know how to code. It's just not going to function.
Do you subscribe to the 10,000 hours rule?
Not really, because everybody picks things up. Different languages sink in differently. Even for me, there's things I can pick up just naturally really quickly, and there's things that just take more time. I do, however, believe that, yes, in the earlier stages, just like learning language, just like spoken language, it's hard at first. It's hard because you don't know the lexicons of it. You don't know the ABCs of it. But once you get through about 202 or whatever, class 201, which is the mid-level, the advanced class actually isn't that hard, because you already know how to use the language. You're just learning how to use, advanced ways to put it in a sentence, or to put it in a way that's more dialect sensitive. So yeah, you've got to dig in. There is no substitute for that time in the weeds. But once you're there, it gets easier. It does.
So I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit, changing topics slightly, I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about your dissertation and what made you choose that topic. And in particular, I'm curious if you had any trouble convincing your mentor, Proctor, that the topic was a good one for the dissertation.
I did not have a hard time convincing my mentor. However, the dissertation process, we say it all like one thing. It's actually at my school, and it was 16 steps, as they call it. And the actual dissertation defense was like step 15. So you're going to go through a lot of hurdles to get through this. This is a long, involved process. And every step along the way, there are challenges to get things approved, whether it's your topic, whether it's the basis of the topic, proving that there's what we call academic merit in it. What that means is that I can't just pick a random topic to write about. I have got to find what's called a gap in research, meaning there's other similar topics, like there was topics about the Linux kernel when I was writing mine and other open source things, but specifically how open source works for Drupal was a gap in research that no one had written about. So that's what you have to tangentially tie this to things that already exist. And so all along the way, so long story short, to answer your question, there was a professor that's separate from my mentor, which is intentional, that is charged with vetting your topic. And he shot it down. Now, that was after his boss, which was the dean of the department, actually had already approved it. And so technically, I should have already been through that step. I'm at step 3 or 4 now. Step 2 is when they cleared it. He was like, nope, I don't think it's sound. And so my mentor really went to bat for me, I have to say. I was very fortunate to have a great mentor that I got along with really well, which is honestly a bigger part of the process than we would like to think it is. But I was very lucky, and he went to bat for me, and luckily we won. The dean as well was like, I cannot believe that. It would be like your boss making a decision and then you going back behind them and telling everybody, no, we're just gonna ignore that and we're gonna do it my way. That's pretty much what happened. And so, that's that. We luckily won that. So I did run into that.
Just out of curiosity, why did he shoot it down? What was his reasoning?
He basically said he didn't feel like it was within the bounds of when you go to a school, or I should say, when I say a school, it's really your department. And in my school, the IT school was adjoined to the business school. That just means that all I'm saying there is that you have got to write your topic specifically in line with their criteria. And their criteria, he was basically saying my topic needed to be specifically about adult IT education, my specialization. Whereas we were basically saying, no, it just needs to be about an IT-based topic that has a gap in research by definition. It's fine if it includes those things, but it doesn't have to. And so that's the argument that we had, and we won that argument.
So what was your kind of thesis and summary? I know it takes years to get through it. If you could condense it down, kind of what did you discover through the process?
Long story short, it was as it sounds, which is, first of all, it's the higher level of it is understanding, why do people contribute to open source for free? What is it that is driving all of us to do this and spending all these late nights? And again, there's not usually a lot of compensation back, even at your actual job. If you do contribute it back, most of the time that's a bonus, but it may or may not be a requirement of your job. So you may or may not, particularly in academia and nonprofit world, you're not going to be getting paid usually for that kind of stuff. So what's driving us to do it? Understanding that within the bounds of what we call a framework in sociological terms. The concept of motivation is a sociological construct. And so putting it within those bounds and frameworks is a big part of it. And so that was what it was about. And studying that, I did a survey of, I believe it was just about 450 people online that were open source variant, and asking them what motivates them. And then you get certain, when I say framework, that just basically means you get a set of questions specifically that you're going to ask that have already been tried and tested through other research. You're just modifying those questions slightly to fit your particular flavor of what you're writing about. And then you put them into a statistical analysis, which is also a process. And that will tell you what of any of those have an actual statistical correlation. Of all of the different points studied, which some of the examples of points studied is, are you doing this because street cred, basically, because your peers kind of value it? Are you doing it because your family and friends think it's awesome? Are you doing it just for fun because it makes you feel good? Are you doing it to get a job or build, up a profile? Why are you doing this? The only statistical correlation that was found was career, looking to get a job and establish yourself in the industry, and establish a profile that you could utilize on a resume. But there's other, I tell people that is the crux of the discovery of what you're looking for, but there's all this demographic information that comes out of it that gives you insight that you would have never thought about could be a part of this. For example, in my study, despite the fact that engineers are usually in our field, open source, maybe 15% women on a good clip, I actually had more than 40% women as my demographic share of those 450 people, which is large. We also found that for anybody who said that they had participated more than 40 hours a week in the Drupal space and committing things back, specifically, was all men, 100% men. And you can glean a lot from that. Now, a lot of the median age range of my survey ended up being, I think, 33 years old, 34 years old. And so for a lot of women, that's heavy child rearing age. And so that might be a part of it, but that's obviously anecdotal and speculation. You'd have to do another survey to really figure that out. But I found that as interesting data. Hey, look at this. Like, that's something I wouldn't have thought of that could have come into the equation.
Man. Wow. That is impressive, I have to say. So,
GPA top of my class. Sorry, I had to give street cred. My mom said I had to. Sorry, she made me do it.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Yeah, you gotta make the parents proud, right? So it sounds like you're pretty busy, and if you weren't busy enough, the word on the street is that you're working on a book titled "How Did We Get Here?" Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it is talking about my observations of the IT field, especially with the turnover, and kind of sounding the alarm about this, and also understanding just the volume of what we're now dealing with and how extraordinary it is. Like I told people at the talk that I know Stephen was talking about, that like your local C-level executive has 3 minutes a day for you. Because let's do the math, right? I've got 60 active projects. Let's say that 50% of my week goes to internal things outside of those projects. You know what I mean? As far as the sales, the proposals, all those kinds of things. The other 50%, okay, 20 hours a week times divided into 60 projects is 20 minutes a week per project. Not per day, per week. Divide that by 5, that gives me 4 minutes a day. 4 minutes a day per project. That's it. That's my world. That's your local level executive's world. It isn't like I get a task, I complete it. I get a task, I complete it, and that's how I keep my job. There's always 3 million things you could be doing. Where does your energy best apply to the organization? That's a different way of thinking, and approaching that from that different way of thinking. But in my kind of time of doing this, I have been amazed at this, how we've all accepted churn and burn culture as the norm. Why are, these are some of the brightest minds on the planet. If we had doctorates of medicine up in here talking about, well, the average turnover for a doctor at this hospital, it ain't but a year, we would all be in the street being like, what is going on up in here? What is up? But we've got people that are doctorates of engineering that are experiencing this. And, there's surveys that are like, out of 200 engineers surveyed, 100% of them said that they've experienced extreme burnout, with extreme burnout being not just tired or even run down. That is to a point, as you guys, if you've experienced it, it can't be solved with just a day or two of rest. It takes days of feels literally like you got hit by a bus. It feels like the flu almost, like as far as like what it does to your body and your mind. And that's a serious thing. And it's understanding, how is it that, yes, we're in an IT field with all of these machinations, but let's talk about the people. Let's talk about what it's doing to the people. Let's talk about how, because we're not investing in our resources anymore, as far as pensions and, yes, training and all those things are becoming less common. In a field where the dollar wasn't so high, people would unionize. People would say, you know what, we're fed up with this. We're not getting paid enough. We're working too long. We're going to unionize. But in our field, because it's a lot easier to just jump, and again, there's a lot more work out there, that's what we do. We just jump. And so, that's something that we're noticing. And so that's really the crux of the book is about, is look at what's going on. How do we fix this? Like why are we all okay with this? So that's the crux of it.
Is there a solution?
My solution is there should be a recognition within organizations that this is a thing, and particularly how to stop the burnout effect. It is realizing that in our world, everybody wants everything on the website right now. Okay, you're never gonna. Some fields are just like, okay, everybody wants it up there yesterday. Everybody thinks their stuff is an emergency. So we have to be careful about what we define as real emergency. Too many of us are told, there's jobs where I've been told I have to work weekends, kind of like Office Space or the movie, like, you're going to be here on Saturday. And because these are multi-million-dollar government contracts, especially, they feel like, well, we're paying you all this money per hour. You need to be doing it. And if you don't push back on it, then they're going to try and sort of juice you out, because, that's how they're used to doing. Google and Yahoo and some of these other big ones where you see on their 60 Minutes where they went in and skateboarding ramps all over the place. I told them I thought I was going to be drinking craft beer all day when I got to my big job, what I had at one of these big companies. And, there's video games and there's free yoga and there's free food every day. Yeah. You know why they're doing that? And then executive shift 24 hours, because they don't want you to leave. They want you to burn out. This is by design. This isn't by accident anymore, because you're young, usually you're unseasoned. You don't know concepts like non-disclosure agreements. You don't know about non-compete, and that from the time you leave there, it's going to be 2 years before you can work with anybody else there. And if you do it and they find out, they will sue you. You're not hip to these games. They know that you're cheap labor. As long as they can burn you out, they're going to try. And so I find like getting people to understand that that's the case. And it's like, why are we doing this? Why is it so bad? Is it really so bad that we say, you know what? I'm going to make sure that every engineer in here is Drupal certified and we're going to pay for it. Like, those types of things are what lead to sustainability. It's only an emergency if a production system is down or there's a production launch. Both of those are reasonable things in our field to expect to work some late nights. That happens. It's gotten better with cloud hosting. There's usually not as many chronic fires in my experience with good architecture, but it happens. Otherwise, unless you're on an emergency support contract, which you've already diced out with your employer prior, this falls under normal business. Okay. With normal business means normal hours, in my opinion.
So do you think it's organizational, the problem? Do you think it's organizational? Do you think it's systemic, or is it really both?
It's both. It's not just them. The engineers as well recognizing this, I think, in my experience as well, because the burnout effect, I feel, is a part of, when my mother, God bless I love my mother to death. She's my everything. Hi, Mom, I love you. She, when I first got out on my own and first got my first real career-oriented job out of undergrad, I was there for about 9 months to a year. Long story short, it wasn't really coding. This was systems installation for licensing software, yada, yada, not really coding, just kind of a variant of IT. Well, it didn't work out. It wasn't really what I wanted after that much time. It was way too much travel. Long story short, I told her I was going to flip jobs. Well, my mother had worked at the federal government for 45 straight years, in Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And so for her, she was like, are you sure you want to leave? This hasn't been very long. Like, are you sure? Like, it was, for her, it was, that's kind of her mentality. Now, my dad understood. He's like, yeah, IT people flip around all the time, even by that point. But for her, and sort of growing up with that, as far as, you stay where you work, like you stay, you're committed to it. Doesn't matter if the road gets tough, like that's just what you do. But it's a different world now. Again, there's no pension. So what is the incentive for me long-term to stay here specifically when I could go somewhere else and still get a 401k, just like with you, probably a higher match rate and a higher hourly an hour rate. So that's that part of the culture of not investing, I think, is the biggest issue that could help stymie this, because without that, the overcommitting and telling developers, all these hours that you're working and all of that, this is normal, then it becomes our normal because we're not talking about it. We're not acknowledging that this is going haywire.
Do you think there's room for a developers union?
There are. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
There are freelance unions already out there, and they are growing. And I have seen them recently make more headway to try to gain traction into this. I do believe that it would serve us all well to start having those conversations and seeing what that looks like, because that's the ultimate muscle power you're going to get. And none of us can do it on our own. I ran my own freelance company for several years, and it was actually quite successful. I just got tired of being the everything. I became not just the coder, but the debt collector. When somebody didn't pay their bill, I became the project manager. I became all of these things at once. It's exhausting. And so for me, after a while, it's like, you know what, maybe this 9-to-5 salary thing ain't so bad. I think, again, yes, talking about that and saying, hey, are you all experiencing this? Okay, so what are the rules, boundaries, and limitations that we want to set for ourselves? I think that is definitely something of merit.
Well, with your sensitivity to this burnout in good working environments for developers, with you at the helm over at North Studio, it sounds like it would be a great place to work. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about North Studios.
Absolutely. So we are, as noted, we're based out of British Columbia, Canada. We do have a decentralized team that is, North American based, meaning we have developers as well as management team. They're both in the United States and Canada heavily. We do, as noted, have 50 to 60 active clients. We have been very blessed, or whatever you want to call it, to have done very well so far this year. Despite the pandemic, we actually have seen quite a decent uptick in work. A lot of our clients did double down and say, okay, well, we're all home all day long just staring at this website. Let's get this bad boy fired on up here. Let's get this moved around. Let's get this blog over here. And, they got really into it. Some of that is because we are heavily a B2B business as far as the clientele that we serve in the web. Excuse me, as you guys probably know, B2B has still pretty much been churning throughout this. The B2C, they got hurt and got really slammed. We do have some of those that had kind of put the prospects of rebuilds on a back burner a bit. But the other thing is that in our space, because Drupal 9 is coming out and the progression to get off of 7 and 8 is such a push, and Acquia is pretty much saying, okay, yeah, sorry about the pandemic, we still getting off of this stuff next year. In our industry, that works in our favor as far as people going, well, we can put this off until maybe the fall, but we got to keep going as far as getting these rebuilds moving. So all of that has worked heavily in our favor, I think, as a company. So we have not experienced layoffs at all. Luckily, we've actually started to grow more. We started hiring again as well. It's been a great year. But in general, we started off as a predominantly Drupal shop. We now consider ourselves pretty much platform independent. We are still heavily in open source, and I think we will be. But we do have some proprietary things moving around in here, especially integrations is quite common. Salesforce, especially Outlook products, all of those types of things. Microsoft products, all those things are quite normal. So we do have a lot of Drupal. We have a lot of WordPress. We have several full stack. We are actually also mobile apps and things like that we are getting into more and more. So we've diversified a lot. Our preference is React over Angular in general, but we've done Angular before as well. So that's our profile and makeup. There's about 15 of us in management, and there are roughly 30 engineers, give or take, at any point in time, depending on their bandwidth, that are at our shop.
Oh, very interesting. So if anyone listening has any questions or has feedback for our show, you can reach out to us on Twitter at Talking Drupal. You can always email us at show@talkingdrupal.com. We do have a newsletter. You've probably heard about that in the past. You can get our newsletter updates by going to talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
We are now releasing each episode on video. Visit our YouTube channel at youtube.com/talkingdrupal and make sure that you hit that subscribe and like button.
And thank you to our patrons for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and push that become a patron button.
Dr. Brown, it's been awesome having you on the show today and talking about the wide range of topics that we talked about. Is there anything else that we didn't get to, or that you'd like to share with the Talking Drupal audience?
Maybe some of that sage wisdom you keep.
Yes, definitely. I would say to the developers, or I should say, I shouldn't just say developers, but anyone that has an active role in the development cycle, pace yourself. Take care of yourself first. We can get more projects, we can get more money, we can get more clients. We can't. You're a human being, and you have to come first. If it's ever getting to a point where you feel like it's impacting your personal life, if you're laying in bed every Sunday dreading going to work and all that, and that's a chronic issue that you've tried to talk to your management team about, know when to seek greener pastures. It was hard for me the first time, or even few times, realizing I had to do that, or getting laid off or fired, wherever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, you have to put a period and move on for what's best for you. You have to look out for you first. So that's first and foremost. But otherwise, to organizations in general, listen to your engineers. They're the heart of your engine room if you're a web shop. Literally, they are what make everything tick for you. And if they're not having a voice and you're not learning from the experiences you have, every project at North Studio, we do a lessons learned cycle at the end. What went right, what went wrong, and how can we replicate the good things and get rid of or start to sign off the bad things. If you're not doing that and you're not learning from what's going on and listening, you're gonna have those systemic issues.
Absolutely amazing. And if our listeners wanted to reach out to you, they had questions, they just wanted to chat, what would be the best way for them to do that?
For more specifically about myself, it is Shallon, Shallon, at northstudio.com. Feel free to email me directly. I have no problems with that. You can also go to northstudio.com to get information about us as a business model and some of the projects that we do, and as well as the work.
Amazing. Stephen, where can people find you online?
It's so simple. Just go to Twitter and type in Stephen Cross with a PH.
And Nick, what about you?
You can find me online pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, Nicxvan.
And for the 251st time, I'm John Picozzi. You can find me on all the major social networks at John Picozzi. And if you want to learn more about Oomph, you can find out about us at oomphinc.com.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.
See you guys.
Have a good one.
Bye, guys. Thank you. Have a great day.